Greetings and respect. Welcome once again to the continuing news journal, the Melanin Chronicles. I'm your guide and facilitator, Yero Bandelli of the International Kibalan Society. The Melanin Chronicles is a news journal on issues we believe critical to the survival of African and progressive people all over. Today we will revisit a program we aired last October. The program focused on the story written by Gary Webb. Gary Webb is an investigative news reporter for the San Jose Mercury News. The story was entitled The Dark Alliance, in which he chronicled the relationship between the CIA, what we today know as the Contras, bringing in crack cocaine into South Central Los Angeles. Of course, we're all familiar with the consequences of much of that activity today. Before I introduce my guests, I'd like to read an opening statement that have chronicled essentially what has transpired since the story last broke. The story was written August 18th through 20th, 1996. And what has happened since that time is essentially what follows. There have been a committee that was convened by the Senate to look into the allegations. There were individuals who were called as witnesses to testify as to their knowledge and relationship to the allegations. Some of those individuals were former former Contra leaders. Some of them were former members of the CIA and other government agencies. What, in my view, amounted to keep the people calm by just showing them that we're responding to their concern, but really was not anything that was worthwhile, because the individuals we have all seen and we have all known that are complicit in the activity in and of itself. So we would like to have our guest, who was with us in October, share with you some of his thoughts and ideas as to what has transpired since the story last broke. Let me introduce you to our guest. Again, he's former DEA agent, Michael Levine. Michael Levine is a veteran of the DEA, 25 years, who have served 10 years in deep cover, who have infiltrated drug organizations in Asia, the U.S., and Latin America. He's the most decorated agent in the DEA, a man responsible for the imprisonment of over 3,000 criminals, serving a total of 15,000 years. A man who has been an expert witness against corrupt federal agencies, who have appeared on, well, I'm looking here, and in just about all the shows that we know and familiar with: 60 Minutes, Larry King, Good Morning America, NBC, Dick Cavett, Dan Rather, just to name a few. He has been called by the New York Times a genetically engineered, in relation to his recent book, a genetically engineered sex drug that dangles like a fascinating fruit, compelling and authentically written. An incredible, mind-blowing read. I was up all night. This was Mike Savage, news reporter in San Francisco, in relation to Mike Levine's latest book, The Triangle of Death. He's also authored two previous books, The Big White Lie and Deep Cover. Michael Levine, welcome again to the Melanin Chronicles.
Great, thanks for having me.
I wanted to go right into your view on those two hearings.
Yeah.
How do you feel about them? And I'm particularly concerned because after reading all of this in terms of your background and the stuff that you have done, I would consider you an expert in this. But in looking at that, and I watched the whole thing twice, I didn't see you there.
Well, no, they don't want me.
Why was that?
Well, that would be very embarrassing to them. To me, you'll forget, Yaro, I spent 25 years as an insider watching the public manipulated by the insiders. Mm. So to me, it was like being an X3 card Monte player myself, watching a masterful game of three-card Monte. The government playing three-card Monte with the people. The sucker card is, look what we're showing you. Look at this hearing. That's the sucker card that's supposed to keep us calm. That's the sucker card that we're supposed to bite and say, well, at least the government is investigating. Why it's a sucker card is that the investigation, the whole investigation, did everything they could to avoid real criminal evidence showing that everything that Gary Webb said was dead on and accurate. The other sucker card was taking Congressman Maxine Waters and sending her to investigate in Nicaragua when you have DEA agents like myself, DEA agents like Celerino Castillo, the ex-consul for the Iran-Contra Committee, Jack Blum, 60 Minutes, the head of DEA on 60 Minutes, all saying CIA trafficked in drugs. It's here. You don't have to go anywhere else.
I wasn't aware that Maxine Walters had any background in that line of work. I don't know if you're familiar with
Well,
that.
she's a congresswoman, and she's in California where the story broke. And she, God bless her, she's trying to keep this thing out there. But she is, I don't know if she's, you know, used to the con game that the government pulls. And I can't really talk about her because I fell for the con game many times myself. These guys are good. The kind of evidence that they didn't show is just one piece, for example. This, let me see if I can hold it up for the camera. This is a page from Oliver North's personal notes. It's a Xerox, and unfortunately I put it on yellow pages. And what you see there is that it's blacked out, part of it. Well, it was blacked out by Oliver North's attorneys and White House attorneys. I got this page from the National Security Archives. Now, what the page talks about is, let's see if I can call right here, is call from Claridge. Now, Claridge is Dewey Claridge, top CIA official. Dewey Claridge was pardoned by George Bush for perjury and lying to Congress. Now, Claridge called to discuss a call from Calero, Adolfo Calero.
He was one of the witnesses.
Yeah, he's the guy who said the charges are crap, and he didn't even know a CIA agent. Now, strange, you know, top CIA official, one of George Bush's friends, sure knows him. Now, what they discussed, if you look all the way down here, and it's been interpreted by many people, as a matter of fact, Claridge himself on a television show with me didn't deny that this is what it says, these bottom two lines. This line here, third from the bottom, says, wanted aircraft to go to Bolivia to pick up paste. The next line says, wanted aircraft to pick up 1,500 kilos. Now, paste is certainly not permabond glue. What you're talking about is Oliver North talking with a CIA official about a call from Calero where they discussed an enormous amount of cocaine paste. Now, this, for me, as an expert, is by itself enough to go forward for an indictment. I'll explain the conspiracy laws. As a DEA officer right here in New York City, I once headed up a case called the Cesar Ramirez investigation. And Cesar Ramirez was a jeweler on Dyckman Street, Upper Manhattan, who was dealing cocaine. Not a lot of cocaine, you know, compared to 1,500 kilos. You know, he might have dealt at most that we could catch him with a ½ kilo. And Cesar had two friends that were New York City detectives. Pardon me, one was a police officer, one was a detective. Now, we couldn't prove that these two officers made a nickel on drugs. We couldn't prove that they helped him. The only thing we could prove was that they knew Cesar Ramirez was dealing these small amounts of drugs, and they did nothing. They took no action to stop him as police officers. They were sentenced to 8 and 12 years in prison each for conspiracy because they took no action. Now you have this, which is so much more evidence than we had against these two officers, and it's right here in the National Security Archives. Oliver North testified about this stuff in secret session before Senator Kerry. None of that evidence was discussed. So what kind of hearings do you have? You know, you have to know that the hearings are doing everything they can to feed us that sucker card, that three-card Monte sucker card.
What is going to happen then, beyond the hearing?
Well, what's going to happen is exactly what I predicted.
Look into your crystal ball.
My crystal ball's easy. I predicted it. I might have predicted it the last time I was here. I said it's going to go away. Why is it going to go away? Why the government isn't even, you know, when I was here last, you had a presidential election.
Yeah.
And you had the whole world focusing on this presidential election and this incredible news from Gary Webb, and neither presidential candidate is talking about it. Yeah. So what that told me, again, as an insider, was why aren't they talking about it? Because they know it's going to go away. They know they're going to ignore it, and it's going to go away, so we won't address it.
Hold that point right there, because towards the end of the program last year, I asked you the question as to how should it be approached? And we talked about the role that the Black Caucus at that time was attempting to play in that relationship. You mentioned to me that you felt that that strategy, as far as trying to portray it as a black issue, was detrimental to getting anything to come out of it, and you explained to me why.
Well,
now, I wanted to pick back up on that, because I think, in a sense, if I'm correct in terms of where you're going, that's essentially what you feel right now is still an issue as to why it's going to go away, because in fact it has become essentially looked at as a black issue?
The politicians at that moment, when it was news, the reason they didn't talk about it was they felt they could get away with not talking about it because the American public only perceived it as a black issue. And they were right. It's going away. As much as people said, we're going to keep it in the news, it's going away. And you say, why? You know, it's the old principle, the old Machiavellian principle of divide and conquer. If you think back when, one of the few times in our history that the American people really did something to change some of these crooks, these lying crooks in government, you had Vietnam. And what you saw on the street was the American people. You saw blacks and whites, you saw kids demonstrating. We were together, and we changed things. They don't want that to happen. They learned. We saw during Watergate, it was then an issue of the American people, and we had the media for the only time. The media was on our side. They were demanding. In fact, it was just two reporters. You know, I'm wondering now whatever happened to Woodward and Bernstein. The national media, they went after President Nixon for this little burglary, which is so much less than this. You know, and mind you, this is one page, and Oliver North has hundreds of pages like this that have never been investigated. Now, all of that stuff should be before Congress. Their actions are telling you why everything I'm saying is absolutely dead on. So the principle of divide and conquer is at work here. Keep the black community separate, isolated, outraged, fighting for itself. Make the white community think that this is just a black issue. Well, it's working. You know, I'm here. One of the reasons I suppose I'm really qualified to talk about this is because I had a son who was killed by crack addicts, and I had a brother who was a drug addict who killed himself. So here I am saying, you know, this is my issue too. These people putting dope on the streets killed the people I love the most. They almost killed my daughter. My daughter was a crack addict. I wrote about them. There are millions of people like me. We should all be in this together fighting these guys. And by making it just a black issue, we played into their hands. That's what they wanted.
Yeah, and but let me reiterate my response. The last time I raised the question and you responded in the manner that you did. Again, if someone attacks you, you have to defend yourself, right? I don't think, to me, that the caucus or any other black organizations stepping out front on this is actually making it a black issue. I think that that's the intelligent thing to do.
Yeah.
My question is, what is happening to the rest of the country who is equally being affected by the devastation of drugs and crack in America in general.
You're right.
Why haven't we seen that outpouring also from other communities that would coalesce around this whole issue to fight it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the only thing that I can come to from really observing this closely is, and you're right, I'm not saying, and I realize it just came out that way, that the Black Caucus was played for suckers. No, they did exactly the right thing. What they should have done is go out front, make it alive. But like you said, if I'm attacked, and if I'm attacked by one person, well, I'm going to react a certain way. If I'm attacked by an army the size of the CIA, well, I'm going to look for help.
Sure.
You're out there now, say, do whatever you can to make it a national issue, which I think they did. But where we lost, and Thomas Jefferson said that you can't have a democracy unless you have a media. Where we lost was the media's support of the government's position. That is, the media portraying it, if portraying it at all, because the issue, you know, is amazing. It was news in California, but it was a long time before the New York Times or the Washington Post even carried it. And when they did, they attacked the piece.
Sure, and they're still attacking.
And they're still attacking it, and a fraudulent attack, really bad. I mean, we could talk about each of the pieces attacking Gary Webb's piece. Bottom line of it is the media ganged up on the piece and portrayed it to the American people. And that's not just white people, to middle-class America, to Latinos, to the rest, the majority of the country who read national media, that the piece was full of holes, that it is just a black issue. So it wasn't a matter of the Black Caucus couldn't do it or did the wrong thing. They did absolutely the right thing. But they were fighting more than just Central Intelligence. They were fighting a media that is a rubber stamp for the government. And unfortunately, you know, I think back about when John Deutsch, the head of Central Intelligence, you know, who was so lauded by our leaders, and I say, for what? You know, I mean, what did he do? John Deutsch refused to cease and desist, allowing Central Intelligence officers to use the cover, that is, to pose as journalists. And this was public. See, now you look at the media. I did a little research and found a statement by Katharine Graham, the woman who owns the Washington Post, and she made a statement before during Judge Webster's turn at the helm of Central Intelligence to a graduating class of CIA recruits. And what she said to them, and this was in the late 80s, she said that she felt democracy worked better if the media doesn't have to tell the public what it knows. And when powerful people like that take it upon themselves to hide horrific truths about our government from us, well, the result is you have a situation where one huge section of our government that has budgets of $30 and $40 billion is deeply involved in hurting us, attacking us. It's like having somebody in your family who you pay to watch the house opening the door to gangsters to come in and slaughter us.
Let me, 2 points. One, I know also, I think it was in December, Deutsch either on his own or was ordered to go to Los Angeles to attend a community forum on the whole issue. And there were some very angry individuals there who asked some questions that he really could not answer. And you know, he talked about he's committed to investigating this and leaving no stone unturned, and you know that all of those things that we're so familiar with hearing from these people. Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to go beyond at this point, however, the Gary Webb story, because you and I know that the Gary Webb story just exposed a part of an ongoing problem and a situation that preceded even the point of the Contras. What I would like to get some response from you on is the role that Ollie North played in this process, as far as being in that position of being a broker for the Contras on the one hand, as far as funneling money to them, and the relationship that we now know that the government had with supposedly one of its arch enemies at the time, Iran, getting those weapons and monies for them to, in a sense, fund the country. What can you kind of give us a background on what you are aware of as far as that relationship is concerned?
Well, Ali North, you know, from all the research I've done and from the people I know in government who've tried to investigate Ali North, and let's talk about Celerino Castillo. He's a DEA agent. He was stationed in El Salvador during this whole resupply mission, and knew that Oliver North's people were running drugs through El Salvador, and tried to open an investigation into Oliver North himself, and was told, and this is in his book, by the U.S. ambassador, stay out of it. It's a White House operation. White House operation. And that was at a time when President Reagan was in the White House. Now, you got to stop and think about this. I add to this fact a recent show I did on Fox Network News, the Cryer Report, and on the show with me was Dewey Claridge, the top CIA official. And I mean a top CIA official, a close friend of George Bush. In fact, George Bush pardoned Dewey Claridge for lying to Congress and perjury.
Mm-hmm.
Dewey Claridge on the show said, and I'll paraphrase him, he said, Oliver North was a very small, insignificant part of this whole thing. It's the first time I heard that, but it's what I suspected all along. Oliver North was just a front man for Central Intelligence. Mm-hmm. And this is the first time I heard a CIA agent say that, which even lends so much more weight to a document like this, where he's talking to Claridge and they're talking about needing planes for drugs. Mm-hmm. And so what do I think about Oliver North? Well, Oliver North's role is enough if you consider the two officers of the New York Police Department that I put in jail. Oliver North's role, I see enough evidence. Had the U.S. government investigated it and charged him with evidence like this, he would have gotten at least a life prison sentence. That's his role. But was he the main guy? Absolutely no. I think Oliver North, you know, originally when I started to go through Oliver North's notes and I saw the mention of drugs on 400 some odd pages, I said, the guy is a boob. He's a complete nincompoop. How would he do that and not shred it? And then it dawned on me that Oliver North leaving these notes with drugs all over it was his warning to the President of the United States that if you let me go, I'm going to lay this on you. So what these notes did was it forced our whole government to protect drug traffickers, because if they didn't, he was going to bring down the top of the government again for something a lot worse than the tiny little burglary that brought down the government during Watergate, for drug trafficking. I think the situation that we're now in, and people I know in government, I mean top people, people very much involved in the Iran-Contra investigation at a very high level, have told me very simply that the evidence is so damning and so complete and so absolute that the people who run the government right now realize that if it were presented to the American people and investigated the way we did Watergate, it would bring down the government. It would totally destroy all the American people's confidence in this government for either ineptitude or total criminality. Ineptitude and criminality that ended with us being shot, not any enemy, us being shot. So the decision has been made within the media, within the top levels of the U.S. government, to cover up.
So
they think it's the patriotic thing to do, and the ex-CIA chief, Colby, who's now dead, once wrote that one of the reasons the media doesn't go after Central Intelligence, you know, the way it should, is a false sense of patriotism, and I think that's what you see going on right now.
Yeah, I think, and that's a good documentation of that would be Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent. I think he kind of lays out the relationship between mainstream media, many of which have either served at some point for the CIA at some point in their career as they develop, so they feel beholden to them.
I can tell you a story going on right now. A friend of mine is a serving CIA officer, and he is suing Central Intelligence. He's a group supervisor in New Orleans, who is suing Central Intelligence for killing cases and jeopardizing his life and bugging his phone. And he has 6 other DEA agents suing with him. These are serving agents. Now, they've been told you can't go on the media, but the papers are filed in court. I know someone, I can't name him, but he's very high up in national media. And I know him on a personal basis, and tried to get him to report on the story. And he assigned one of his reporters who contacted me. And the reporter said to me, can I get DEA agents to testify? And I said, well, these guys will have their heads chopped off, and you know that. Look what happened to this State Department guy, Rick Nuccio. The message is clear. If you come forward and talk about criminality in government, you're going to be stomped on. But these are court papers. Just report on the investigation. You have 6 serving DEA agents suing Central Intelligence. Just report on that. He won't do it.
So let me make sure that I'm clear on what you're saying with respect to how North fit into this whole relationship. It's your view that based on what you've seen as far as documentation, people that you've spoken to who are either involved in this in some way or written about it, that what we're talking about here went beyond just Oliver North and went to the actual person sitting in the White House as the president of that time, which would in this case be Reagan.
And then George Bush.
George Bush, who is also former CIA director prior to becoming the vice president. Now, I believe it was 1986, because why I'm trying to get this broader picture, because I still bumping into people who still have difficulty believing that
hey, look, tape record this show. You know, here's the thing. I qualify as an expert. The government called me one of their best. Tape record the show. If I could be in charge of the investigation and just take the evidence that's available, well, I'd start indicting people tomorrow, starting with Oliver North. I mean, the evidence is there. That's what I did. I'm a professional conspiracy investigator, called one of the best by the government. So, I mean, I know it's hard to believe. I see people roll their eyes up, but it's a fact. You know, there's an old strategy. There's the 36 strategies that the Japanese martial artists study. It's a 2,000-year-old strategy, and one of the strategies is hide in broad daylight. You know, and it's kind of like the government has decided to employ the strategy of hide in broad daylight, because there it is. It's right out there in front of us, right here in America, but let's distract the people who are interested. Let's make them think it's too outrageous. Do all we can to keep it out of national media. Send the spokesman for the people who are trying to keep it open on wild goose chases like Maxine Waters down to Nicaragua. It all gives the impression, again, like three-card money. We're doing something.
Something's being done.
Something's being done, but nothing's being done, and they're waiting for it to go away. And it is going away.
Give me a sense of some of the roles that are played by some of the names I'm about to mention. I believe it was 1986, the then president of Costa Rica,
Oscar Arias.
Yeah, Oscar Arias. Barred. These are the people. Major General Richard Secor, former National Security Advisor John Poindexter, former U.S. Ambassador to Costa Rica Louis Tams, and former CIA Station Chief Jose Fernandez.
Yeah.
Why?
And Oliver North.
Yeah. Why?
Well, for drug running. For using Costa Rica to run drugs and guns, but the drugs were coming to the United States. This is, by the way, Oscar Arias is not only the president of Costa Rica, he's a Nobel Prize-winning president. Very respected man, no kook, no boob, no axe to grind. He's the head of a democratic nation.
Yeah, well, and hold that point, because I think if you read a lot of the news about that time, Costa Rica was seen as like the darling of America. It was projected as, you know, the little America in a sense.
Well, it is. A lot of Americans go down there. A lot of Americans went down there to retire. I quite frankly went down with my wife. I was thinking of living there, or at least, you know, going down there for a year or two to write a book. It was, for a long time, it was called the only Western democracy in South America, the only Western-style democracy. So you're talking about a country that is not a dictatorship, not a drug-running republic, who decided they were going to go after drug dealers who were sending drugs, using their country to send drugs to America. Now, this is the Gary Webb piece we're talking about. This is that operation.
Sure.
So he indicts one person. The rest of these people he banned from ever coming into their country. He indicted a man by the name of John Hull, who was on Oliver North's payroll. Why did he indict him? He had 5 witnesses who were flying drugs into the U.S. 5 witnesses. Now, if those 5 witnesses testified before a court in the U.S., this whole crew would have been indicted.
Now they had John Hull.
He was arrested.
He was arrested.
He was
in
arrested
Costa
and
Rica.
charged and released on bail.
What happened to him?
He was spirited out of Costa Rica by DEA. So here you had a case where the U.S. government sends the drug fighting agency to help one of the biggest drug violators, at least in Costa Rica history, because we never charged him, to escape prosecution. Well, then Oscar Arias and his country tried their best to extradite this drug dealer who was sending drugs to us and get him back to Costa Rica to stand trial. And Oscar Arias suddenly found himself pressured by U.S. senators and congressmen to stop. And he was astounded. He said, you know, basically, what am I doing? I'm trying to stop drug dealers, and the U.S. Congress is trying to stop me, threatening me with taking away aid. Now, that's incredible, but it speaks for itself.
So that was
This is the same Congress, by the way, that we expect to investigate right now. You know, these are the same people. This is
Sure.
A lot of the same names.
Yeah, because I was looking at some of the video, and I was looking at some of these people now. You know, they're a few years older, obviously. But you see the same.
All Inspector.
Yeah.
You know, All Inspector wouldn't come on. I did a radio show someplace, and he was supposed to come on till he heard I was going to be there. And I'm embarrassing. You don't want to come on to a man like myself who can say, I put U.S. citizens away, many of them in jail for many years, for much less evidence that's available against these U.S. government officials. Much less. But, you know, back to your original question, if you want to know, you know, where Oliver North's role is. Oliver North is not the top of this thing. You have right here, here's Dewey Claridge, who was pardoned by George Bush for lying to Congress in perjury. Well, why did George Bush pardon him? You know, if I was to be a cynic, I say just to keep this drug thing from reaching him. Well, I'm a cynic. Why am I a cynic? Because I'm trained by the U.S. government.
Let's turn to talking about some of the things that you documented in your most recent book, The Triangle of Death.
Yeah.
You just want to tell you that, first of all, the read was very good, and I sat down and read the book, and throughout I'm thinking to myself, there is a certain intimacy about the person who's writing this book that could not come from fiction. It has to come from experience, having lived these things. What percentage of what's in this book is fiction and what's fact?
Well, almost all the really chilling events that were put together to weave the story are fact. The Triangle of Death, the organization itself, was named by a U.S. prosecutor. It was started by the Nazis right after World War II. It still exists now. It still exists because it's in partnership with covert agencies like Central Intelligence, the French Secret Service, even the Mossad, which is ironic, but it shows you the reality of you know, this world of spies and drug traffickers. They're in business for themselves. They'll deal with whoever they have to for their own benefit, often to the detriment, to the destruction of us and our families and our lives, often. These are unholy alliances. That's based in fact. The drug, La Reina Blanca, sex-based version of cocaine, genetically engineered, hasn't hit the streets yet, but it comes from information that I got while I was stationed in South America that I still have. It came from an informer who was probably the best informer DEA ever had, and she's the one who predicted crack cocaine almost 6 years before it happened. She told me that these people are genetically engineering this drug. The torture murder of the agent that I described as Rene Villarino, well, that comes from the torture murder of Enrique Kiki Camarena, whom most people don't know was investigating one of Oliver North's pilots when he was tortured to death. And when I say pilot, this guy was very high level. His name was Mata Ballesteros. Mata Ballesteros ran an aircraft company that was on the State Department payroll, running guns down to the Contras, drugs up to the U.S., while DEA had him listed in files as a murderer, as a drug dealer. Kiki Camarena was investigating him. And then Kiki Camarena was arrested, tortured to death. And when I say tortured to death, it was just like I describe in the book. He was kept alive. They had a doctor there keeping him alive. They put red-hot pokers up his rectum. They finally killed him by driving a Phillips head screwdriver into his head. That all comes from reality. And Mata Ballesteros was finally convicted of conspiring to kill this man. But nobody in the U.S. government tells anyone in the American public that Mata Ballesteros, when he killed Kiki Camarena, was on the U.S. government payroll. So that's what it's based on. That's why you saw, I think, anger and rage in this book. And
talk a little bit about the organization.
The Triangle?
Yeah.
A Triangle of Death was named the Triangle of Death by a U.S. prosecutor in Manhattan back around 1971. And I was part of the investigation, and it was started by a Gestapo agent. His name was August Joseph Record. And he was sentenced to death in absentia by France. He's a man who killed a whole bunch of French freedom fighters. Joined the Gestapo, a Frenchman. He runs away to Paraguay, and he sets up this murderous organization that deals in murder and drugs. When we began investigating...
What's the name?
The Triangle of Death.
Okay.
He didn't call it that. I'm going to explain why the prosecutor called it that, yeah, exactly the way I described in the book. He put a map of the globe up in his office, and he started putting black pins in the map for every overt act in the conspiracy, every murder, every drug transfer, and it formed this big, thick black triangle across 3 continents, and he called it the Triangle of Death. So, ergo, you know, I called it the book, The Triangle of Death. But what did they call themselves? Nothing. They were an organization that was comprised of ex-Nazis, Italian Sicilian Mafia, French Corsicans. They did jobs for Central Intelligence. When I say jobs, they committed assassinations. They committed the one assassination that we described, Mehdi Ben Barka, in the book is real, where you had the Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, work with the French Secret Service using an ex-Nazi to kill a Middle East terrorist. And that's the reality of this very strange world. I don't know what the percentage would be, but what the book is a bunch of horrific facts that I had no other way, no other vehicle to tell the people about, other than weaving it together in, you know, a Tom Clancy-ish type of experience. Because, you know, the other thing about it is that led to this book was being in the movies and seeing a Tom Clancy movie, Clear and Present Danger, at the end, you know, which was like the greatest PR for CIA I've ever heard. At the end of it, a CIA officer runs in and arrests a George Bush lookalike, you know, for running drugs. And the CIA officer is kind of an Oliver North lookalike, you know. And next to me was this guy who stood, applauded, and there were tears coming out of his, you know, tears coming. So I realized that Americans they can't put it together. They don't understand reality. They don't, the difference between a movie and reality. And so this is a way of kind of, for me, I guess, of fighting back, you know, and doing the same thing, only showing reality as opposed to this incredible fraud, you know, this incredible PR trip, you know, for Central Intelligence. They couldn't pay Tom Clancy enough for the PR work that he does for them. How true it is, I can't. You know, my wife and I, Laura Kavanaugh, who, you know, wrote it with me, sometimes we talk about it, and I've already, you know, blurred it all. My whole life has been such a blur, but it's so true that it's chilling. You know, yeah.
The character in the book, the daughter, Costa Rica.
Yeah, August Record's daughter.
Nadia, I believe?
Yeah, I call her Nadia in the book.
Okay.
I didn't use her true first name
okay.
because she's running the organization just the way I described. She's out there right now running that organization.
Okay.
And has never been arrested.
I want you to give, you know, just talk a little bit about the organization in terms of some of the things that you talked about in the book, the viciousness of it, the production of this particular drug.
Oh, well, first of all, the purpose of the production. The drug was originally part of a Central Intelligence program to come up with mind control drugs. So these guys, in essence, were working for Central Intelligence. The program back in the late '60s was called MK Ultra. And Central Intelligence, they don't want to be reminded of this, but Central Intelligence was experimenting with U.S. citizens, unbeknownst to them, putting LSD in their. They set up one operation where they used the Bureau of Narcotics and prostitutes where the prostitutes gave the Johns LSD, and they would be in a hidden room filming it, you know, as trying to determine whether you could use LSD as a mind control drug. What they found was that the most potent control you can have of human beings is giving them pleasure, not pain. Intense pleasure, which is the basis for all drug addiction. It's intense pleasure. You give people intense pleasure, you can get them to do anything. And what they perceive is intense pleasure. And what is more pleasure than an amplified, a magnified, a concentrated sexual orgasm, one that endures for 15 and 20 minutes. So they began working, at least according to my information, genetically engineering some of the 200 variants of the coca leaf to try and come up with something that affected the sexual centers of the brain exclusively. You know, the myth about crack was, and they used to call it the love drug, was that it was a sex trip, which is really not, you know. You talk to a few crack addicts who've had it for a while, you find out that, you know, there's no love. There's no love involved here. But this drug, La Reina Blanca, it's alleged to give the user a huge sexual jolt. Now, the downside of La Reina Blanca is it sets up an irreversible, for a short period of use, an irreversible deterioration of the organs. So in other words, if you take it for a period of time, a different amount of time for each person, you become almost the equivalent of an AIDS victim. You're going to die. So if you get enough people taking it, you destroy an economy. You have a whole bunch of people dying. You also, you get something like, I think at different times you've had as many as 80 million people who tried cocaine. Well, you would convert an enormous amount of casual users to hardcore addicts. Right now we have less than 3 million hardcore addicts in this country, and that number's been constant for at least 10 years. You put a drug like La Reina Blanca on the street, well, you're going to up that 6 times, 4 times. It'll destroy this. But the real side effect that a lot of people in government want to happen is the violence that the drug induces will set up a feeling amongst all of us of anarchy, fear, kind of like the image of black street gangs running across the country with crack cocaine. And what happens when you have fear in the American people? And this, I think, is proven historically at this point. We run to Congress and we say, give CIA more power, give FBI more power, save us.
During the hearings, the Iran-Contra hearings, there was a question that was put to Oliver North regarding writing a request to suspend the Constitution, justification to suspend the Constitution. And I think it was Senator Daniel Inouye said that those type of things would not be discussed in public. That the hearing would be closed and those things would be discussed behind.
I think Congresswoman Waters should be talking to Inouye, because Inouye also stopped all talking of drug trafficking on the floor of Congress. It all went into secret session, thanks to Inouye, a Hawaiian senator, and others. You know, he wasn't operating by himself. And these people think they're doing something patriotic to hide from us how criminal these guys are, and that's what they did.
I wanted to stay on that particular thing as far as that particular drug is concerned, because in going through the book, the implications of that hitting the street is just, to me, just so, it's hard for even myself, someone who I think at this point essentially have adopted a model that very little surprises me.
Well, you got to know
but
that it's going to happen.
To talk about the devastation that something like that would wrought. In it you talked about, and again, mixing fact with fiction. You talked about an incident where there was an individual who had been given a small dose of this in a nightclub, and his reaction to it was such that I think it took 15 Glock 9 bullets to stop him after he had killed about 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
And this was no super 6'6", whatever. This was just a regular human being. But this is some of the violence that engenders.
Yeah. I saw a guy on crack cocaine take something like 15 cops, hitting him with these 6 battery flashlights and clubs, and it was the most incredible thing I've seen. And he was throwing people like flies, you know, I mean literally like flies. Now, I was trying to arrest the guy, and I came with 2 people, one on either side of me, straight at him, and he threw a punch, and I ducked. Well, I used to box and be in the martial arts. I just managed to duck. He hit the guy next to me, and it was like the guy was launched by, you know, some kind of landmine. He went, and I grabbed the guy around the waist, and I'll never forget. It was like holding coiled steel. I didn't know where the strength came from. All I could do was hold on and hope he didn't hit me. And with me hanging on him, and I'm a big guy, he was throwing people like bowling pins, and that was just crack cocaine. I haven't seen La Reina Blanca work. This comes again from one of the best informers DEA had. You know, again, it's relayed that was the kind of effect that the drug had. And what I was told is that there was great difficulty in producing the drug in quantity. And
why is that?
Well, because it was a hybrid of both a variant of coca leaf and a hallucinogenic plant from the jungle that just didn't grow easily. And you need an enormous amount of it also at the same time to come up with a small amount of the substance. Again, told by the same woman who gave me crack cocaine, told me about crack cocaine.
What about the aspects of testing it? Because of its destructive nature,
well, what I was told was it tested out just like cocaine. You had to actually do a genetic kind of testing to look for genetic evidence of the drug, or just you know, the way the drug would have to be sold is exactly the way we describe it in the book. That is the way they sell heroin. They get a junkie. You give it to him, and you know, is it bad? I mean, that's historically what was, you know, the classic way.
So if he dies, it's great.
If he dies, it's great.
That's it.
Well, you know the psychology of a junkie. I remember back in the early 70s, and at the time my brother was a heroin addict, and he was living with us. And I really didn't get it, you know, even having a brother. And my brother once told me, he said, you know, and I probably want to die and don't have the nerve to kill myself. He eventually did. He committed suicide. But I heard those words from other junkies over and over. Now, for the first time in my life, I arrested a guy who was running cutting mills on the Lower East Side, and I forget the brand name, SOS, Hollywood, something like that. But you know the way it works. You got all these brand names. And he decided to go to work for us. And he described what they were doing, and he said that every 100 bags or so, every couple of 100 bags, they put in pure heroin. So I said, what do you mean, you kill the guy? Whoa, he said, no, we don't kill him. He's, you know, some of them die, but I don't do it, he said. This is the business. He said, everybody does it. Why? He said, well, when someone dies, it's good for business.
Everybody
wants that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the kind of mentality that we're dealing with that our leaders don't understand. But the people who manufacture La Reina Blanca do. The people who are trying to come up with it, they do.
We also mentioned on the last program, we talked about what needed to be done, what kind of steps could be taken for people that were watching this program, you know, the regular person out on the street that are concerned about this.
It's so hard.
Most people, I think, you know, are just numbed by this. It seems so awesome. It just seems like, you know, how can I possibly play a role in this?
See, I look at myself kind of like, you know, sort of like Johnny Appleseed. You know, I run around and I try to educate people, you know, with the truth. I feel like I'm planting seeds. It's the best I could do. The government doesn't, they pretend I'm not there. I'm very embarrassing to them. So all I can do is, you know, speak to an audience and hope a lot of them recognize the truth and hope out there someplace is a real leader who is going to be affected by these words. The other thing I would say is, you know, on a real simple level, is when you vote for a politician, what you vote for, what you demand, is a complete stop of the war on drugs. Because, you know, here we are, this year we spent $15.5 billion, you know, a lot of it went to CIA and military agencies. In the last 7 years we spent $100 billion, and you can't find one street corner in America that's any better. And I'm an expert, and I'm saying that if you didn't spend another nickel on the drug war, it wouldn't make a difference on any street in America, not one. So, simple way to begin is saying, just end this drug war. Let the local police handle it. You don't want the federal government involved in the drug war.
The question, before we get to, again, some of those answers in terms of how people can be involved in this. You mentioned to me that when you go around on different programs, one of the questions that is always asked of you is, well, why are you still here?
Yeah.
You know, having gone through this, knowing all of this, knowing the reach of these entities, why are you still here?
Yeah, because people ask that question. You see, as long as I seem less than credible because I'm alive, well, then the government leaves me out there. You know, you take Philip Agee, for instance. He wrote, many years ago, he wrote the Diary of the CIA, and he showed how dastardly, how evil, how counterproductive they are, what enemies they are to the American people. And he wrote this. He's still alive. They threw him out of the country, but he's still alive. John Stockwell, he wrote about the CIA. He's still alive. Rick Nuccio, the State Department official, came out and nailed the CIA, and they destroyed his career. You have to follow the story. Publicly destroyed his career, and all he did was the best for the American people, showing that CIA was involved in the murder of the husband of an American citizen, to tell us that. And they destroyed him for that. So, but not killed. Why they don't kill somebody like me, or Celly Castillo is a DEA agent who they tried to put Oliver North in jail and was told it's a White House operation by the U.S. ambassador. Stay out of it. Celly's alive. The head of DEA, Judge Bonner, on 60 Minutes said CIA is drug smugglers. They got caught red-handed drug smuggling. He's still alive. Why are we all still alive? Very simple, because even though we came out and we tell the truth and we're very credible, the American people don't know how to get off their butts and fight back. And the CIA knows it. And the government, the people who want to cover up for this boobery, this criminality, who don't want the American people to really grasp it, who don't want to do anything about it, they know that if they ignore it, we will do nothing.
Now, I imagine that when you came to work for the DEA, that there are certain oaths or whatever that you have to take. I know that there are certain things that cannot be discussed even when a person leaves those organizations quite often.
Yeah.
But yet you've seemed to have done that.
Yeah.
And again, nothing has happened. Why is that?
Well, when I started writing books, the first thing I knew is I had to have my stuff really together in a sense that whatever I wrote, I had to be able to prove. And I was. I thought I would be before Congress. I thought when I wrote my first book, Deep Cover, I would bring the world down. And I was the first DEA agent to come out and say the drug war is a fraud. Here's the truth. Nothing happened. The other thing that I knew was that I had to have a rationale that was so strong that the government would not move against me. And that rationale is very simple. As a government agent, and I served for 25 years, I signed another oath, two oaths. One is to protect the bureaucracy's secrets. The other oath is to protect the Constitution. Now, if protecting the government's secrets makes me destroy the U.S. Constitution, well, they're causing me to violate one oath or the other. I can't keep both. So I chose to be loyal to my oath to protect the U.S. Constitution. Now, why they don't do anything is very simply, they don't want this public. They don't want it public that U.S. agents hired and made to sign secrecy oaths are signing oaths that cause them to destroy the U.S. Constitution. And it's as simple as that, or as difficult as that, you know. I'm not even sure anymore whether it's simple or difficult. The only thing I know is that after I came out, I retired New Year's Eve '89. Almost everything that happened just took the heart out of me, took the soul out of me, when I realized how totally helpless I am, how little one person can do. And again, it just brought me back to the feeling that the best I could do is over and over come out and let the public decide for themselves. Am I credible, am I not? Most people, I think, recognize truth when they see it. And then hopefully somebody is going to come up from the black community, from the white community, wherever, a leader is going to come up and say, I'm going to change this, and have the power to do it.
Mike, I want to thank you once again. You know, we ran out of time. I don't know what to say in terms of just appreciating you coming back and sharing some of this information with us. We hope that the audience that are watching this are taking this at heart and are going to get out there and, as you say, get up off their butts and do something about it. I want to thank you for coming on the program.
Well, thank you for keeping me from the psychiatrist's office for one more day. Thanks a lot, yo.
Thank you. We've been talking once again with Michael Levine. Michael Levine is an author at this point. His most recent work is The Triangle of Death. And I think we've covered a whole range of issues regarding the role of the government with what is called the drug war. That's not really a drug war, as far as Michael Levine has pointed out to us. But again, we share these programs with you, not for entertainment, but in the hopes that this will move you from being more concerned with who won the Super Bowl to actually the concerns of the people in your community, your sons and your daughters. And so we hope that we've been able to fulfill that responsibility. Now we'll see what you'll do with the information. So again, we're glad that you can join us, and we hope that you join us next week on the Melanin Chronicles. I'm Yero Bandelli of the International Keelan Society. Take care of each other. Peace.